All right, we are going to get started in another 30 seconds. Okay. Welcome to Child Voice Project's November Roundtable. I am Atiya Mosley, Chief Legal Officer. And as a reminder, these roundtables serve as a place for knowledge sharing and learning. We are building a clearinghouse of research-based best practices for child-centeredness, and we invite you to bring your ideas and questions to these forums. If you were with us last month, you heard our interview with Maryland Pilot Program attorneys, the second segment in our guest expert series. We hope that you now have a better understanding of our signature project. If you missed last month or want to watch that session again, please use the link in the chat. This is our last roundtable for 2025. We're going to return on January 21st at 1 p.m. Eastern and resume these critical conversations. Thank you so much for being with us this year as we create a world where every child is heard. We look forward to continuing our learning together in 2026. We invite you during today's session to participate. Please start by typing your name, your location, and your professional identification in the chat, as well as your questions and comments. We use your feedback to inform our work and future roundtable topics. We believe that our time together will be better because of your participation. And because we're in the holiday season, we invite you to type in the chat one of your favorite holiday traditions. All right, let's go ahead and get started. We have a lot of great content today. We're discussing the challenges and resistance to children having their voices heard, despite the strong markers of how children's self-expression aids in their development. Developing reasoning and problem solving, metacognition, listening skills, and verbal communication abilities are just some of the developmental benefits that stem from children's self-expression. As professionals who interact with children, you may naturally encourage their autonomy. However, there are many other adults, including some in this field, who don't agree with children having a voice in decisions that impact their lives. Why is there resistance? What are some of the challenges when it comes to hearing from children? What are the criticisms? What are the myths? We're going to invite you to answer some questions. We'd love to hear from you. Have you experienced resistance from other adults when sharing a child's perspective? Have you observed parents shushing a child, telling them to stop making noise, or stopping their self-expression? Have you done it? Have you tried to tamper down a child's voice? We'll take a minute and invite you to share in the chat your experiences and observations. Child's Voice Project has adopted a model of client-directed representation because we believe in the value of children expressing themselves. Hearing directly from children is a necessary part of child-centeredness. And Emily, if you would advance the slide, please. Thank you. Oh, and as a reminder, we are recording today's session, and the video will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. So we ask that you not share confidential or sensitive information about your clients, cases, or even family members. And these are some of the foundational components of our work as well as the client-directed representation, which we understand as being child-centered. There are developmental benefits associated with child client-directed representation. As I mentioned before, they include developing problem solving and the ability to communicate. Yet, there is still criticism to this approach. When I was utilizing this method of representation for close to 10 years in North Carolina, I likely heard every criticism imaginable. Some of the most common criticisms of client-directed representation include that children would be placed in the middle of their parents' custody action if they had their own attorney. And Emily, if you would advance the slide, please. Great, thank you. And if you'll go back one more. Nope. Okay, forward then. Two more. Thank you. Okay, so some of the criticisms is that if children had their own attorney, they would be placed in the middle of their parents' custody action, that children were just too young and weren't able to express their own wishes. A related criticism is that if the children were given a voice, that they'd only be repeating back what their parents told them to say. Another common criticism is that children would be burdened by having decision-making responsibility, like it would be all on their shoulders and they had to figure it out. And one of the challenges that we face is that people who genuinely want to support a child's self-expression may not understand why children need to have attorneys. They might assume that the child's preferences can be communicated to the judge in another way. Have a few more questions for you all at this point. We would really like to hear about your experiences. Have you heard any of these criticisms yourself? Are there other criticisms that you've encountered? And if so, how do you respond to these criticisms when you hear them? Do you sometimes have these criticisms yourself? And you're here today to educate yourself on this issue. How else have you educated yourself and confronted your own biases about children and their capabilities? So if you'll go ahead and share your experiences and observations in the chat. So let's go back through these criticisms and discuss how we might confront them. So one of the relatively common ones is that children, by having their own attorneys, will be placed in the middle of their parents' custody action simply by virtue of having an attorney. When in reality, we know that children are already in the middle of the parents' custody action. They're living in a home with two or more people who are fighting, and the children witness the conflict firsthand. They may be brought into the conflict by their parents to pass messages, used as pawns, or thrown into the role of providing emotional support for a parent. They may have even been abused by one of their parents. Children are impacted by custody decisions as much or perhaps even more than the adults involved. The decisions made in legal proceedings shape the trajectory of their lives. Giving them a voice can aid in better accepting the decision, even if the outcome is not one that they wanted. While we may not always be able to remedy the family conflict, helping children by providing them an attorney, can contribute to them building protective factors, which may buffer against stress and adversity and mitigate long-term harm. And I'll come back to protective factors a little bit later. A related criticism is that children will only parrot back to their attorney what their parents will tell them to say. And this could be viewed as manipulation, coaching, or influence. And something that I have learned since coming to work with Child's Voice Project from Dr. Sloan is that children are definitely influenced by their parents. They are also influenced by other family members, their teachers, friends, and coaches. They're influenced by the media. Do you know who else is influenced by family members, loved ones, friends, and media? You and I. Most of us are influenced by the media. And yet, in the context of a legal proceeding, we may hold the influence of children out as abnormal and detrimental to their development. We diminish their autonomy when we think that they are so easily influenced that they no longer have their own preferences and wishes. And we found that relationship building strengthens a child's self-esteem and autonomy, and it allows them to be clear about their own preferences regardless of external influences. Another common criticism that I heard while representing children is that they don't have the capacity to express their own wishes. And we know that even young children, ages 4 and 5, have the capacity to express themselves and their preferences. They are developmentally capable of meaningful participation in the decision-making process, and they can accurately articulate their wishes. They're developmentally capable of expressing themselves, and we can encourage them to do so, which helps them to develop self-efficacy and confidence. And this can protect against some of the loyalty binds or suggestibility that may be a concern. And as adults, we can help children by the conditions we set and the environment we provide. So one of the other pieces to this is a challenge that even people themselves who may support children expressing their voices may not understand the value in children having their own attorney. This might be a misunderstanding of the court process and how evidence needs to be presented, but it also can stem from not understanding that child-centeredness can be better advanced when children have their own attorneys who can explain legal concepts to them in ways that they can understand, who can express what is likely to happen in proceedings and to help with client counseling. They can better understand the circumstances that they're going through when there are external influences happening. Those can be put into perspective. And client counseling, of course, is a very necessary part of serving child clients in the same way that it's a necessary part of serving adults. The relationship that is cultivated between an attorney and a child within the protection of attorney-client privilege and confidentiality can really increase the reliability of a child's statements and boost their credibility. Another common criticism that I am familiar with is that children will be burdened by having decision-making responsibility. And give me one second. I just mentioned that client counseling is a tool that can help children from feeling burdened by by having to make decisions. And I will address this criticism a little bit more later when we discuss some of the myths. So let's talk about protective factors. Will you enter into the chat your knowledge of protective factors, what they are, and whether you encounter them in your work? And I see supportive parent or adult. Aren't we all a little bit burdened by decision-making responsibilities? Yes. And so children also deserve to have the space to be able to do that. Great. So what are protective factors? They're conditions or qualities that help to mitigate or minimize the harmful effects of adversity. They are the ingredients of resilience, which is commonly known as healthy functioning after adversity. As a child attorney or a professional who interacts with children in other ways, you can help children to develop protective factors and help them buffer against the stress of being impacted by a family that has conflict going on. The protective factors can also mitigate against long-term harm. Now, there's only one way that children can build resilience. And we know that a child who is encouraged to share their feelings and thoughts about a situation can fare better when their voices are not stifled. An attorney can explain their own role and the roles of other people who are involved in the process, some of the legal concepts, as I mentioned before, and place them into language that the child can understand. They can keep their child client aware of the proceedings and do all of this in a developmentally appropriate way. And this can really help the child's understanding and processing of some of these really stressful events, which helps to promote their mental health. So more questions for you all. What are some of the protective factors that you have seen in children impacted by family conflict, and how have you helped children to develop protective factors? All right, let's go ahead and move on to the myths. Um, have you all encountered myths that adults hold about children being given a voice in decisions that impact them, like where they'll live? Um, I will share some of the common myths I encountered while representing children in their parents' custody actions, and also share the reality, which very often when you hold up the reality of a situation, you can combat resistance. And in this case, it would be resistance to having children's voices heard and cultivating child-centeredness in legal proceedings. And you can also adapt these realities to other professional encounters with children. Um, so the first myth is children may be too young and emotionally immature to have a meaningful say. One of the aspects of this myth that I heard someone even use during their closing argument, that if children are asked what they want They will respond with something frivolous like chocolate cake for breakfast or video games instead of school and the right to stay up all night. And that is a pretty persistent myth around other attorneys who I've encountered as a representing children myself. In reality, most of my clients had very reasonable requests. They were providing insight into their parents' behaviors, and so often their request was simply for their parents to stop fighting. Now, as a professional, I was able to set the stage for these discussions by explaining my role and confidentiality, why I was appointed to represent them, who was in the process, and as I said before, that the judge was the decision maker. And Emily, if you will advance the slides, please. Thank you. So it's important to remember when it comes to development that it is highly individualized and there are individual developmental strengths and weaknesses that factor into how different children need to be addressed and what may work best for them when it comes to the work that you're doing with them. And Emily, if you will advance, please. Thank you. So this developmental overview is helpful to remind us that even children who are young can form the the ideas that they need in order to guide their own preferences and can provide to the attorney or other adults enough information to be able to advance the concept of child-centeredness. And as we're talking about, this certainly comes up in legal proceedings with adults who are representing children, but it can also come up in the work that other professionals do with children. So this is a great overview to keep in mind. And some of the things that are happening for young children ages 3 to 5 help to show that even they can form what it is that they want and have the ability to be able to communicate this to adults. Now, I have represented children who were as young as the age of 4 for client-directed representation, and even having a 4-year-old in my office, that person, that child was able to express to me in their own ways what it was that they wanted in a meaningful enough way for me to be able to direct the representation and to represent to the court what their position was. Now, it's true that as children grow older, they are able to have a greater understanding of some of the concepts, like legal concepts, that they might need to understand. Young children may understand confidentiality if you talk about something that is private. Older children may have heard the word confidentiality. And so different children can receive information differently depending on their maturity and their education. But all children deserve to have their voices heard. And this developmental overview is one that shows that even, you know, the youngest children, uh, I'll say it this way, this supports our mission for children to be heard because we believe that even very young children have something meaningful to add to the conversation and deserve to take part in decisions that impact their lives. So, Emily, if you will continue, please. Great, thank you. So another pretty persistent myth that I heard is that children, simply by the virtue of them having an attorneys, are going to get to decide what the outcome is, which ironically seems like the adults are not understanding the legal process. Um, One of the benefits of having an attorney is that we have ethical principles that we have to follow, and we know that the judge is the final decision maker. And I would counsel both adult and child clients. So when I represented adults, I did the same thing that I did with my child clients. And I would share my experiences with a particular judge, the likelihood of the outcome, and how their wishes aligned with what was likely to occur. And very often, my clients' wishes would change so that they were more in alignment with what the judge was likely to do. Sometimes that would not be the case, and then we would proceed based on that position that they took. But client counseling, as I mentioned earlier, is such an important tool. And it is another reason why it's important for us, for children, to have attorneys, because their decisions are being made in a legal context, and attorneys can help them to better understand the context. And also, in those very rare cases when a child had a position that potentially could cause them harm, client counseling was critical in helping them to understand those risks. And as a reminder, with client-directed representation, my role was to provide my client's position to the court and ensure that their voice was heard, not to dictate or to promise what the outcomes would be, which was obviously beyond my role and my ability. Okay, next slide, please, Emily. So another myth is that children would be harmed by participating in the court process. And as we've talked about today, and as you all most likely know, children are impacted by their parents' custody actions just by virtue of being in households where there's conflict going on. So many children simply want to live in a peaceful home with both parents. And yet, because of their parents' behavior, they cannot have this desire met. And just acknowledge that not all parties are simply children's parents. Sometimes they're grandparents or other relatives who have provided care or are seeking to provide care. And that tends to be the same, that children want to live with both of their parents, and they want to live in a peaceful environment. And so, because of this unique role that we see children playing in these custody actions, it's harmful for children not to participate in the court process because these decisions are impacting their lives. And it's important for the judge to hear what the child's position is so that the position can be considered and possibly influence the judge's decision. Judges in many of our jurisdictions are supposed to consider what a child's wishes are, and attorneys are in the best position to be able to communicate that to the court. And we're helping attorneys learn how to communicate with children in order to be able to get that information and have it to be able to present. And having their voices heard, even if it doesn't impact what the outcome will be, can help to reduce children's anxiety and the uncertainty that leads to dysregulation, because children can keep children abreast excuse me, attorneys can keep children abreast of what is going on in the legal process and how the children's futures may look with a particular judge. We've also found that an adult who takes a child seriously and is advocating for their position can help to empower the child, which can improve their outcomes after the legal proceedings are over, even if the children don't get what they want. Next slide, please. So this myth overlaps with one of the common criticisms that we talked about earlier, this fear that what children tell their attorneys is going to be from their parents and not what the children themselves are actually wanting. And I think that this is probably one of the most widely held myths by the adults that I've encountered over the past 9 to 10 years. And what we know is that in our society, children are raised in a manner that is akin to coaching or influence. They're taught by their parents, either in word and or deed, how to be a good friend, religious practices, family values, the importance of education. It would be foolish to think that children suddenly are not going to be coached or at least influenced in a custody action. Yet, what we found and are finding is that client-directed representation and child voice projects approach centered on relationship building with the child client results in the child feeling comfortable sharing what is important and meaningful to them, and that relationship building is a critical aspect of learning what children really want. And that brings me to our slide on relationship building. And one of the reasons why we are so insistent on this being the foundation of the child client representation provided by our pilot program attorneys is because it improves the information that is coming from the child. So the judge has the best information that they can in order to make their decisions about the child. And spending time with their attorneys, having fun, doing activities. It could be drawing or coloring or walking, or I had a client teach me how to play soccer. Spending time with children, helping them to get to know us as we get to know them is important to help to build trust and help them to feel comfortable saying what they truly think and want and believe, even if they have received influence from external resources. And it's one of the things that we may find difficult as adults because usually we have an agenda and we want to get straight to business. And one of the perspectives that we're encouraging is that spending this time on relationship building is part of getting down to business because it is such an important marker of the relationship that the child is going to have with their attorney, and it also supports the reliability and the credibility of the child and the information that we receive. So I have gone through most of my information, encourage that any one of these myth busters that we've talked about today can lead to greater child-centeredness in the face of resistance. And we encourage you to use these and others. And with that, I'm going to open up for any questions or any additional comments that individuals may have on this topic. All right. So as we near the end of our time together today, I want to thank each of you for joining us and for getting to know us this year. We also thank you for attending and being part of this developing cohort. And Emily is going to put up our topics for 2026. We're working on other activities in December, and we will return on January 21st with the topic of child-centeredness. We look forward to resuming our roundtable discussions on the third Wednesday of each month and invite you to join us. And if anyone has any, let me just make sure, Emily will allow you to unmute yourself if you have a comment or question before we end our time. Me.